Welcome. This is the latest with Band 2. It is February 27th, 2020, and I was inspired to do another video here based on the coronavirus, and I've been wanting to do this for a while, and the story has been changing so much, and there's so much here to it that it was really hard to get grounded into it and bring it all together. But after about a month or so now of this having been declared a global health concern, it's really capturing the public's imagination in a way that past viral outbreaks haven't. You had SARS, you had MERS, the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, you had H1N1 swine flu a few years back. You've had these in recent memory, and the fatality rates were actually higher than what we're seeing with the coronavirus, certainly for SARS and MERS. And yet this is really almost from its inception, it has captured the collective's attention in a way that we haven't seen any health story, let alone really any news story. When you think at the start of the year what the news cycle was about, it was about the US embassy in Iraq being attacked by Iran, and all this talk at the time that it could be another Middle Eastern war, and that the US would be on the brink of attacking Iran. That all fizzled out. And you had talk, certainly in the US, about the impeachment of Trump, and that fizzled out in almost a spectacular anticlimax. It did not materialize into this huge event. In fact, the trials were really boring. And you had Brexit as well. I mean, for the last how many years? 3 years, we've been worrying about Brexit and wringing hands over that. And it sort of came and went, even though it's not technically a Brexit, but it's certainly the next step of it went ahead on January 31st. And again, it felt rather anticlimactic. And the coronavirus, nobody was really talking about it January 1st. And here we are. It has turned into something people are very concerned about. And it dovetails into a lot with human design. And I can't help but see some of this through the lens. And certainly you have people talking about end of times, end of civilization as we know it, end of this, end of that. You know, people who I know who are really not the fearful types are really scared of coronavirus and kind of speaking in these terms. And I just want to remind people the cross of planning doesn't end or until 2027. And I must say again, I'm not sure I believe that. I don't know what's going to happen. This is all based on the prophecy of Ra Uruhu. And I did study this for a while, and I edited the books, and I'm very familiar with it. I find the story absolutely intriguing, and I don't think you have to look too hard or wide to find signs of deterioration in society as we have known it. You know, certainly for some of us who grew up in the 70s and 80s, things are definitely different than they were then. They are certainly different in different careers you may have chosen 10 years ago. I mean, the changes in some sectors of employment are mind-boggling. And it's not hard to go, well, yeah, you know, things are deteriorating. The center cannot hold. But I think it's a bit premature. Concerns about the end of cross of planning. We still have 7 years. And I do recall from different lectures and whatnot that as long as the infrastructure is there, the World Health Organization, the CDC, and we'll talk about this later, you know, it's all fine now. You know, but once there is a chink in this, once there is a crack in all of that, then what do you do with these global health concerns? So I just want to talk about it a little bit. Again, I do think fear is overblown here. And I would really caution against getting too wound up about some of this. 2 minutes on Twitter reveals something that when I was just kind of going through the book, The Prophecy, I stumbled across this quote. I'd forgotten all about this quote, but this really jumped at me too in terms of the coronavirus and the coverage and the news we've been seeing. The quality of the information we receive is retarding. This is on page, I love the number 111 in The Prophecy of Ra Uru Hu. And that is so true. That is so true. I have been in the media for about 30 years, and we have more media than ever. We have more news, and it is just creating a complete noisy world in which it's hard to parse and parcel through any accuracy. And I do think this has contributed to why the coronavirus has become such a story. People don't trust the information out of China and its leadership there because it is a communist regime and they don't value freedom of speech. And this has led to a lot of citizen journalists on Twitter coming up with all kinds of reports and video footage, and really you don't know what you're looking at, you don't know what you're seeing. It's not exactly the most trusted either, coming from these citizen journalists. And then you have two people in the US not trusting one thing Donald Trump says because they just hate Donald Trump. And he gave a press conference yesterday, and I had the news on, and even before he talked, people said, on some of these cable stations, oh, well, whatever he says, we can't believe it. And it's like, well, okay. And you're getting all kinds of contradictions from the CDC. So if we just take a look at the infrastructure here, so we have the World Health Organization and Center for Disease Control and Prevention in the US. But it does have a mandate. It's part of the federal government, no question. It's the part of the Department of Health and Human Services, and they are responsible, CDC, for a lot of these institutes you see: National Institute of Mental Health, National Institute of Obesity, National Health of Osteoporosis. I mean, you name it. They have many sub institutes under that. And again, I just refresh people's memory that as long as these infrastructures are in place, and I'm paraphrasing here, society, this cross-planning will continue as it has in the past. And there's no reason to think that this infrastructure is not in place. If you are on the CDC website, you can see, their 23-page guideline for health professionals, what they're advising. They're keeping a tally of everything. They're keeping records. They're giving advisories on how to handle lab reports, emergency care, you name it. It's very, very thorough. I'm not going to go through this all here, but I get back to the quality of the information we're getting is retarding. It's not the world's greatest. And this is a case in point. So the World Health Organization, and you go again on their website, they've got a very thorough list of who's sick, where. They're keeping tallies of it. They're giving advisories. And yet in the New York Post yesterday, you have an official there saying countries outside China are, quote, simply not ready yet to contain a coronavirus pandemic. They quote Dr. Bruce Aylward, an epidemiologist, warning that countries without the disease preparedness and rapid response technology that China has will have trouble containing the spread of the virus. Big conclusion for the world is it's simply not ready. It could get ready very fast, but the big shift has to be in the mindset of how we're going to manage the disease. So this guy led this mission of COVID-19, which coronavirus is called, and praised the country's quarantine and containment measures and testing measures, but is warning about this, given now that it's spread to Italy, South Korea, and Iran. We've also had some contradictions too by the CDC, and I'm not going to get into all of that, but again, we get back into the quality of how information is being disseminated here. And while you go on the CDC webpage and it's very clear what's going on, what's coming out in the media is just nothing but contradictions. You have one CDC expert saying it's inevitable, this is going to be a pandemic, and then last night at the press conference, they're going, oh, no, 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 no. And when you read the CDC itself, they're saying it's a really low chance of an American getting it. So, I don't know. I know that I'm not worried about it. That is for sure. So what does this have to do with anything Bantu related or human design? Well, it was interesting. It touched on, again, this cross of planning, but it also touches on this tribal and communal circuitry. And if we look at the first day of the Rave New Year, and the very first day when the outbreak was declared a public health emergency of international concern, you can see Gate 19 was in focus. And again, on the first day of the Rave New Year, it was this theme touching into the communal. And I believe I talked about that a little bit. And on the day that it was declared the outbreak, again, this was very much the theme. This was very much the imprint on humanity at that time. This channel 19 to 49, which is tribal and it's communal, depending on whether you're looking at Bantu or human design. It's different words for pretty much saying the same thing and meaning the same thing. In Bantu, we talk about this as the communal design. And this is what is good for your immediate tribe, your family, your people, your nation. We had Donald Trump yesterday saying he was simply, concerned at first with the health of Americans. The health of Americans. And a lot of these countries are concerned with the health of their people. They are on lockdown. And it's very much capitalistic, socialistic, protective, supportive. It's these themes of getting the needs met of your people. And it is based on bargains and bargaining and the art of the deal. It is really the ties that bind a group together. And you've really seen that. And you've seen it on the other side too, where a lot of people now, I believe it was the CDC actually putting out on their website last night, please, don't be discriminatory against foreign-looking people and people of Asian descent, which is what some people were, some people in that world were experiencing, being in the US and the UK, where people don't want to sit next to them on buses and whatnot. And so some of this is definitely coming to the forefront in terms of the economic system. This is what we have seen, this very much touching on American capitalism, globalistic capitalism, parts being produced in China being able to get to Western countries, so the car can finish going through the assembly line, so the planes can get working, so computers can be made, on and on and on it goes, where it's a very globalistic economy that we've built up, this global capitalistic economy with things so complex, and one plane has parts made in dozens of different countries, and to get all those parts in, only those countries can make it, only that material in that country is the type that's needed. And so you're having a real clash here with this capitalistic strain, but now everyone's hunkering down. We're on lockdown. How are you going to get these parts to where it needs to be? You've got a socialistic or communistic country, China, definitely in the forefront here, and we'll be getting to that later. So this very much touches on this communal, tribal element, and we'll get more into this channel of 1949. It is so significant here. But first, a little bit about the coronavirus. I was really drawn to do another video on this after I read the New York Post story. And this was dated January 25th. Okay, so that's how much I've been kind of churning this around. Part of you thinks, is this just all going to go away like SARS did? But this really jarred me, this story, inside the horrific, inhumane animal markets behind pandemics like coronavirus. And there were some pictures here, really graphic. That is a real yak's head being sold to a customer in a market in Beijing. Well, we know that the seafood and meat and animal market and Wuhan is most likely the seat of where this spread. And certainly the CDC has backed that up, that this novel coronavirus, there's been many coronaviruses, but this new one was a transmission between animals and then eventually jumped to people and is now going from person to person. But let me read this from the New York Post. In stall after stall, and this is at the Wuhan market, a mix of live and dead animals which run the gamut from the known, pig, ox, duck, chicken, to the rare or unknown, due to the condition of the carcass, stare back at you. In the wet areas of the market, usually reserved for fish and sea creatures, and where the ground is slick with water and often blood, the stink is worse. The animals that have not been dispatched by the butcher's knife make desperate bids to escape by climbing on top of each other and flopping or jumping out of their containers to no avail. At least in the wet areas, the animals don't make a sound. The screams for mammals and fowl are unbearable and heartbreaking. These unregulated and usually filthy markets are found all over Asia and Africa. And this New York Post story was written by this woman, Paula Frelich, founder and editor of the online travel magazine for women, Abroad. So that really jumped out at me. And this is not to bash the food markets of Asia and Africa. The West, with its highly organized and highly logistical cattle and pig factories, are gruesome as well. The coronavirus. So the pangolin, an elusive mammal that looks like a cross between an anteater, an armadillo, and a pine cone, is the most trafficked animal in the world, with over 100,000 killed last year. They are hunted for their scales, which the Chinese believe helps with blood circulation. And here's a picture of it. It is the only mammal with scales, and it is thought to have caught the coronavirus along with bats. This jumped at me very much, this story, as just another form of the horrible meat factories we have in the West, but on a different level. And again, there was something in that article that made me think of this channel of 1949, this channel of the sensitive. And again, you have to be really paradoxical when you read the Bible, when you read the I Ching, when you have to read, these ancient scriptures, because it is the channel of the sensitive. And yet, what's the opposite of sensitive? It is brutal. I am so sensitive to the needs of my family that if those needs are not met, I can get brutal. And I will do what needs to be done to make sure my children are fed. Oh, yes, you better believe it. And it's very much connected to the center of emotions. So it is not logical, and it is not logical. And it goes right to the root, right to the basic survival needs. That's what we need, these primal things we need: food, water, shelter, money. You can really see that. So when I read this article, that channel really did come to me. I got a little distracted, though, because we went from pangolins to professors with this another jaw-dropping story here of a Harvard, not just a professor, but the head of Harvard's chemical department being arrested by the US Defense Department for not being open about his involvement with China's Thousand Talents plan, including money he received from a Wuhan laboratory. And he was arrested, and the bond was like about $1 million. And there was another Harvard researcher arrested in connection with this. And I believe a Boston University researcher who was arrested at the end of 2019. And all of this came to light. And there were so many rumors then going around that this new coronavirus, this novel one, was a bioweapon, and that it got out of the lab, and that it was intentionally going to be used in the Middle East against Israel. I mean, the things I was hearing was adding again to our quote. Where's my quote? The quality of the information we receive is retarding. I mean, I didn't know what to think. Nobody knew what to think. And the stories out there were being printed left, right, and center. And again, I follow a lot of financial news, and the financial press was just going completely wild. I've often thought the financial media and traders would often be the best kind of people to get into human design, because it is so apocalyptic anyway. It is so, end of worldish anyway, which is another story, but it's really something. But it's fair to say, who knows? I did look at the CDC, and I'm going by what they're saying here, that coronaviruses, and you can read all of this here, are common. So these are already common in many different species, including camels, cattle, cats, and bats, which were named in that story earlier, being part of the Wuhan market. Rarely animal coronaviruses can infect people and then spread between people to people. Okay, but we had that with MERS and SARS. Okay, and now with this new SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. It's a beta coronavirus, blah, blah, blah. All three of these viruses, this is interesting now, all three have their origins in bats. So the sequences from US patients are similar to the one that China initially posted, suggesting a likely single recent emergence of this virus from an animal reservoir. Oops. Early on, many of the patients in the COVID-19 outbreak in Wuhan, China, had some link to a large seafood and live animal market, suggesting animal-to-person spread. Later, a growing number of patients reportedly did not have exposure to animal markets, indicating person-to-person spread. And now there are some outbreaks in the US where they don't even know how it's person-to-person. So it just seems to be these pockets now emerging, which is why there is now this more fear about this. Okay, so they say it is concerning. These two factors about the illness resulting in death, and sustained person-to-person spread is concerning. These factors meet two of the criteria of a pandemic. As community spread is detected in more and more countries, the world moves closer toward meeting the third criteria, worldwide spread of the new virus. The potential public health threat posed by COVID-19 is high, both globally and to the US, but individual risk is dependent on exposure. And that's something that I heard from a friend of mine who's an infectious disease doctor. She said that a lot of the people dying in China were already frayed, and they already had lung issues due to the air quality in China, and the fact that a lot of men smoke there. I think it's about 50% of Chinese men smoke. So she said right there, they're going to be more susceptible to any virus that would come their way. Okay, so for the general American public who are unlikely to be exposed to this virus at this time, the immediate health risk is considered low. Okay, and again, certain people have an increased risk of infection, and some of these people being the elderly, and of course the healthcare workers who are first responders, people like that really putting their lives at risk. These people who are giving to the tribe and to giving to the community in this very tactile, very physical way, which is really incredible, which is how the whole, again, this cross of planning exists. You have people who have this urge or the energy to do this, and it is quite remarkable, I have to say. It's not something I think I could do or have done in any kind of sustained way. So hats off to them. So I just wanted to read the story from Market Watch, February 26th. There were about 81,000 confirmed cases and at least 2,768 deaths. The fatality rate so far appears to be a fraction of that of SARS and MERS. The fatality rate can affect how fast an outbreak spreads. If people die from an illness sooner, they are less likely to be working, shopping, or flying on airplanes, and thus less likely to spread the virus. COVID-19 rapidly spread from a single city to the entire country in just 30 days. There was talk from some of my Chinese students that this was noted in December, well before Christmas. The sheer speed of both the geographic expansion and the sudden increase in numbers of cases surprised and quickly overwhelmed the health and public services in China. That is for sure. So, and we'll get to that in a minute. The World Health Organization said the fatality rate in Wuhan is between 2 and 4%. Outside, it is thought to be 0.7%. So I get to this whole China issue here. Now, this is key. The sheer speed of this overwhelmed health and public health services in China. And again, let's go back to the quote here. It overwhelmed them, and the quality of the information they were able to send out then was, let's put it this way, not the greatest. And just as somebody who was looking at different media, trying to get a sense myself in those early days, I did finally turn to the New York Times, and I have my doubts about them in terms of domestic political issues, but for international news, I went to them because I do think they will give you a pretty impartial look at something. And this was a great podcast. I recommend anybody interested going to their podcast. It's called The Daily. I don't listen to it daily, but I went to it in this case. And it's called Fear, Fury, and the Coronavirus. China's communist rulers are not just fighting an epidemic, they are also struggling to contain an upwelling of public anger about their own failure to stem the outbreak. And it was really an interesting podcast. It's about 24 minutes long. The New York Times reporter Amy Chin, she said, she lived there for 7 years and she was covering this, and she hadn't heard the kind of talk she'd been hearing until now. So there's a segment there where she is talking to one family about it, and it was the grandmother, the grandpa, the daughter, the kids. I think the husband was around too, but working, and they were all on IV drips because they all came down with it. But the grandpa was the one who died from it. And the grandma, Amy Chin writes, she was so palpably angry that at one point the mother was waving her arms in frustration and almost ripped the IV needle out of her hand. And she says, I've been covering China for 7 years, and I've heard people express frustrations with the government before, but really only in private. This was one of the few times I heard, such raw anger toward the government publicly. And they were in a public spot too, and they were just talking wildly. And Amy Chin was looking around, and she just thought, people are looking at them, but nobody's stopping. The family isn't stopping. This was really different. And the grandmother is quoted in this as saying, is this really my country? Or is this some kind of effed up country, she used the word, that doesn't take care of anything? What kind of government is this? And she was so disgusted because her husband was taken away. And again, the Chinese authorities are trying to contain this virus. And according to the New York Times, there was this lack of respect for human life and the dignity. And again, the grandmother was saying he was taken away after he died, just like a dead dog or a dead pig. And again, it just kind of that theme of those dead animals in the market. And what does, again, this have to do with the channel, 1949? What does this have to do with? Well, it is the art of the deal. It is the social contract. It is all about bargaining. And I really like the podcast because it really outlined what, is it a communist country? How much? I mean, I've got some Chinese students and, talking to them, I don't know, how authoritarian it really is because, in the West, we have cameras everywhere. We have people monitoring us everywhere. Is there a self-censorship going on in the West? Absolutely. People are very cautious about what they say and how they say it. But it's interesting that in our capitalist world, it might not be communist necessarily, but there is these socialistic mechanisms in place. And I thought this podcast really brought that to the fore. So Chin says, this is a matter of life or death, but there is another added boiling frustration about how the government is handling this crisis. And she gets into the eye doctor, the whistleblower, Dr. Li Wenliang. And he really was the first one to speak up, and he was pretty much punished for that. And the people were, again, outspoken. They were furious about this. And when he died, they did not hold back. There were 3 million reactions to his death and 300,000 comments when the hospital where he died posted a statement on his death. So again, if there was any self-censorship going on, it really ended here with this Dr. Lee. And Amy Chin writes, or says, this is about the government and the social contract the people have had with the government, where they agree to keep quiet as long as the government provides for their prosperity and health. It operates under this principle of stability at all costs. Stability at all costs. So we'll keep quiet. We're not going to argue with our government. We're not going to say anything. Kind of like Chicago in a way. I mean, it runs so well. The people don't complain about the corruption and graft because the garbage gets picked up and its streets are super clean. Again, another story, but I thought this was really, really interesting. And again, with this coronavirus, maybe it's not the end of the cross of planning per se, but it is the beginning of this deterioration of some of this energy that's kept the tribe together. Okay, and so this is the 1949. This is in the prophecy of Rahu Ruhu, a design of sensitivity synthesis. Okay, so behind the image of family and community, the ego circuit is really all business. So it's maintaining these communities, these nations, and distributing, spending money. It's very, very strong. The design of the sensitive, deeply sensitive to the emotional needs of others, as I mentioned, synthesizing the needs into a coherent whole. And you could say that the Chinese government maybe didn't do that so great at first. Okay, so this is out of the prophecy. Once the deal has been sealed, the tribe expects both parties to keep their ends up or else the support falls away. So the flip side, and this is me saying this, is, well, I think there is also mention of this, but there is brutality. There is this image of the butcher, and in some of the human design literature, it is called that. And again, you can see why. If these needs are not met, if my husband is going to be treated like one of the dead dogs or dead pigs in the market, you are not meeting my expectation of stability at all costs. How is this prosperity and health? So this is the brutality. And my question is, are we going to see more outspoken people in China? Are the Chinese people going to rebel? We've got protests in Hong Kong. Is this the ramification of the coronavirus more than actually fearing of it spreading and, oh my God, the capitalist system is going to seize and freeze up? Could this, in fact, longer term be a more of a liberation, or more of this individual sovereignty of these Chinese people coming to the fore? The 1949 Bridging Humanity in the Animal Kingdom, it is widely talked about in human design. And we talk about it in the prophecy of Ra Uru Hu. This is one of the bridges for humanity. Our capacity to domesticate animals and be able to use domesticated animals to feed ourselves. So I ask, once this energy breaks down, will animals respond to a controlled environment? Will the animals live up to their end of the bargain? Is the coronavirus nature's way, or a bit of this breakdown of the animal kingdom going, you're not treating us very nicely? This is the brutality. This is it, back at you. And of course the animals are not consciously doing that, of course. But it does play into this. And it does have me concerned about the US food chain. I'm not going to lie. I feel like, I did ask my infectious disease doctor, I said, is the flu, which has a higher mortality rate, and I don't know if it has a higher mortality rate, I shouldn't say that, but more people are infected from it, absolutely. I said, is that transmitted from animal to person anymore? And she said, no, it used to be, and now these strains every year are person to person, and they're mutated. So that might be really obvious to people. I wasn't sure. It really brought that to the fore for me, that, well, maybe some of this, the flu that we get comes from farms, or, through ingesting meat or whatnot. The bargain, I love this picture by the British artist Helen Tabor. And it to me, it speaks of this bargain between the humanity and the animal kingdom, fencing in our cows, our cattle, our animal, our livestock, treating them well, and sacrificing a few for the needs of the community. But we've so deformed and gone way beyond that, again, in the West and East, that it's not even funny. I mean, the bargain is so one-sided here. I don't know what some of these animals get out of it at all. There's a huge religious strain to all of this as well, and it gives new insight to me on the binding of Isaac, which is the biblical story about Abraham being commanded by God to slaughter his son, and God says, no, don't do that. It's like a real kind of, that's it now with child sacrifice that was endemic in these cultures. And instead, it's the ram, that's who you'll sacrifice. So it does seem a bit of the foundation of this, again, bridging humanity in the animal kingdom, strongly linked with these religious impulses, these impulses toward God or the deity. And in all of these biblical depictions, this is by Caravaggio. This one was by Julius Schnorr von Carlsfeld. He was a 1860s, so he was a Renaissance revivalist, and he did a lot of illustrations and stained glass windows, and you can see this here in this illustration, this etching. Caravaggio, the sacrifice of Isaac, and again, it's the same thing. So one of the angels intervenes and says, no, don't do that. Here's the ram, do that instead. And there is a breakdown in this 1949. So while, again, it's not probably the end of the cross of planning and the end of the world as we know it in all these spheres, I believe are very misplaced. This could be, again, something breaking down in the bargaining in this 1949 circuit, which will not be in existence for the rave or in children born past, I think, February, funny enough, 2027. So anyway, a few thoughts on all of this. I'm just kind of pulling things together. Again, it must be said, I am not saying this as though I believe it and this is going to happen. I find all of this a really fascinating prophecy, and there's so many prophets out there. I'm reading on Frederick Douglass now, who was considered a prophet. I'm interested in prophets, and I'm interested in what Ra had to say. I'm interested in how Bantu has reinterpreted things and the software there, and you might want to go check it out for yourself. I'm by no means treating this as dogma, but food for thought and maybe a way to look at some of this news and just process it maybe a little bit differently. Thank you so much for joining me, and if I have any more, I will be sharing with you. And again, if you have any comments, questions, feedback, feel free to email me, and I'll put my details in the description box below. Thank you so much. Be well, and don't let the fear of the virus become more threatening than the virus itself, if you know what I mean. Bye-bye.